Howdy. Happy New Year. I've been working on flip books in different capacities and trying to figure out ways to make them nice and efficient and less time consuming and less material consuming. So I'm going to go to overhead to talk through some different binding and cutting and this, that, and the other. This is the first iteration of flipbook that I have that is using cardstock, printed stuff, and these materials to bind it. Piece of plywood that has holes drilled in it using brad point drill bit. That's also what I use to drill the paper here, and then it's all bound together using Chicago screws, which have one inside threaded thing, one outside, and you assemble them together as such. It was printed as a grid sequentially, so it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in a grid, and a single sheet of paper would have like 20 unique stills, which works well for conserving paper, but it does not work well for cutting flip books because you have to cut out each page individually from the grid from a single sheet. You're not cutting them simultaneously, which means that you have inconsistencies between each page. This was done using a rotary cutter, and the rotary cutter can only hold so much paper, which means that you end up with these sort of sawtooth wave things that happen because it's being cut still moderately by hand. And when there's an issue, it sort of compounds. You can see how tall the stack of paper was that I was using for each of these, where that sort of point comes to here on the side of the paper is where the stack ends, and so it resets, which means that if you're trying to get a flip book going, you want a very clean edge to it that is consistently across, and when you have a flip book like this, you might end up skipping pages because you're not able to advance each one page at a time. This one's okay, but I had several of these that I made that were much worse. The brad point is solid for cutting through wood. It is moderate at cutting through paper. The paper has issues where it would tear a little bit on the first or the last one, and also because it is tearing through the paper as opposed to cutting it, you end up with some drag as you're drilling through a larger stack, which might adjust the position, and then you have issues with alignment. Brad point works solidly, but not as nice as what I ended up using for some other things, which I'll show you in a moment. The other thing that I'll say with the brad point, it creates a lot more paper dust because it is tearing and sort of removing material in stages. This flip book was a test to use the guillotine cutter that I had and printing instead of having a single sheet, having unique stills in a grid. Each sheet is its own still. It's only one still per sheet, which means that you can print out several at once and stack the paper and then cut them all at once. And because it's printed paper, it's a little bit more flimsy, but it also allowed me to test an alternative binding method, which is using a grommet. A grommet is this guy. It's sort of shaped like a top hat, and you place the grommet through one side, the washer on the other side of the material, and then you use some sort of tool, in my case this crimping gun I guess is what it would be called, and you squeeze down and it causes the top section of here to fold over, and then it binds. It's used a lot with fabrics as a means to have a hole but have a protective layer around it and to connect two things together. The other thing that I did different with this was I got a different drill bit. This is a paper punch drill bit. It has a blade, a circular blade on the end, has a hollow point going through the middle. You have a lot more contact with the paper. You get a cleaner cut as you're going through. Issues that come about with this is there's a lot more friction that happens with this. This gets hot pretty quickly because it's thin material and it's making a lot of contact with the paper as it's going through. And also each time that you're cutting a stack of paper, the material gets trapped in this centered channel, which is why it's hollow, which means that as you're working, you have to remove that material as you go along. You end up with sort of a paper plug thing. Grommets are cheaper, perhaps a little bit faster, but they're limited by the thickness of the material because most grommets are not super tall. It works well for this paper. Doesn't work super great for cardstock. I'm trying out some longer grommets and see how those go. Guillotine cutter is much nicer for getting, even if there are issues with some slant or lack of squareness on the cut, it is a smooth edge, which means that you have a lot more control. Lastly, I have this guy. This is the most recent one that I did. This is using cardstock. I have a larger gap on the edges, so it's less of a concern how precise everything is. But this is on cardstock, using the guillotine cutter, using the drill punch, and I ended up using Chicago screws because I don't have grommets that are long enough currently. I want to see how it works for it, but it means that I have a greater consistency, smoother edge here. I can cut more out at once. This is maybe the easiest and most efficient that I have for the flip books that I've tried so far.